This isn't a fairy tale about a princess. It's a real-life story about a queen who everyone thought was a pawn. Roman Foster was a king in the concrete jungle of New York City, a man who saw his wife Hallie as nothing more than a beautiful decoration. At the most important night of his career, the annual Metropolitan Legacy Gala, he stood in front of his rivals, his partners, and the press, and he publicly mocked her. He called her small. He called her a hobbyist. What he didn't know was that while he was laughing, Hallie was preparing to take the throne. Because in the world of old money and new power, the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. The penthouse at 740 Park Avenue wasn't a home. It was a statement. It was a fortress of beige Italian marble glass walls that stared judgmentally at Central Park and art that was purchased for its investment value, not its beauty. This was Roman Foster's world, and Hallie Foster just lived in it. Roman was a man carved from granite and ambition. He was the CEO of Foster Holdings, a real estate empire that had devoured half of Manhattan's skyline. He hadn't just inherited it, he had weaponized it. He was tall with a mane of distinguished silver hair and wore bespoke Brioni suits that seemed to repel dust and weakness equally. His voice was a low rumble that expected and always received absolute obedience. And then there was Hallie. To Roman, Hallie was his greatest acquisition. She was a Beaumont. The Beaumonts were old money, the kind that whispered in the halls of the Frick and owned dusty libraries upstate. They had the one thing Roman couldn't build: legacy. He had married her a decade ago, merging his brute force wealth with her quiet pedigree. In his eyes, the deal was simple. He gave her a life of limitless luxury, and she in turn was expected to be beautiful, silent, and supportive. Hallie was pale and slender, with large, observant grey eyes that most people mistook for timidity. She ran the household with the silent efficiency of a Swiss watch. She organized his dinners, vetted his invitations, and wore the precise, elegant clothing he preferred today, a simple cashmere day dress in a shade of cream. "The gala is tonight, Roman," she said softly, her voice barely registering over the hum of the city. She was standing in his vast mahogany-paneled dressing room, holding out 3 silk ties. "The car is arranged for 7. Arthur Kensington's office confirmed he will be speaking at 9. Roman didn't look up from the Patek Philippe he was fastening to his wrist. "The blue one. Not that one, the one with the finer weave." He grunted, taking it from her. "Kensington's speech is the only thing that matters. He's finally stepping down from the Metropolitan Legacy Fund. Tonight, they announce the new chair." The Metropolitan Legacy Fund, or MLF, was the unspoken god of New York philanthropy. It was a centuries-old institution that held the keys to the city's cultural and social future. Its approval could greenlight a new museum wing, a billion-dollar urban renewal project, or kill it dead. The chair of the MLF was in many circles more powerful than the mayor. "You're still certain it will be you?" Hallie asked, her hands clasped. Roman finally looked at her, a smirk playing on his thin lips. "Ellie, it's a done deal. My Foster Resurgence project for the West Side is exactly the kind of bold move the MLF needs. Kensington knows I have the vision to lead the fund. The only other vaguely serious contender is that tech bro Julian Thorne. And the MLF board would never hand the keys to a new money disruptor from California who wears hoodies to board meetings." He straightened his tie, admiring his own reflection. "This is the final piece. Once I'm chair, the Resurgence project is unstoppable. Our name will be on every building from 34th to 42nd. Hallie nodded, her expression unreadable. Of course, dear. It will be your night. Our night, Ellie. Our night, he corrected, though his tone made it clear he meant his. Now make sure you wear the diamonds, the ones I bought you from Cartier after the Hamptons deal. They reflect well under the lights. He swept out of the room, leaving her in his wake. Hallie stood silently for a moment, the scent of his expensive cologne hanging in the air. She looked at the two rejected ties, then walked back to her own wing of the penthouse. Her room was different. It was smaller, filled with books, and had a small antique Beaumont desk. She sat down, her posture unchanged, and opened a laptop. It wasn't the sleek, modern tablet Roman had bought her. This one was older, encrypted, and password-protected, with a 24-character alphanumeric key. She logged in. The screen wasn't filled with party plans or fashion sites. It was a complex dashboard of financial portfolios, legal documents, and encrypted message chains. For the last 10 years, Hallie had been the sole trustee of what was left of her family's legacy, the Beaumont Trust. When her father died, the trust was almost insolvent, bled dry by bad investments. Roman had glanced at its books, once dismissed it as pocket money, and told her to let his accountants handle the charity write-offs. He never looked again. He never knew that Hallie, the quiet wife he mistook for a doll, had inherited her grandfather's mind, a mind for numbers and strategy. While Roman was building towers of glass, Hallie was quietly, meticulously rebuilding a foundation of stone. She'd spent a decade in the hobby Roman so despised. She'd sat on small, unglamorous committees for libraries in the Bronx and art programs in Queens. But she wasn't just planning flower arrangements. She was learning. She was networking. She was identifying cracks in the city's philanthropic armor. She made small, brilliant, anonymous investments. She learned the real language of power, not the loud roars of men like Roman, but the silent, binding signature on a contract. The Beaumont Trust, once a relic, was now a silent powerhouse. Its assets had grown 2,000%, and no one, least of all her husband, had any idea. She opened a secure email from the MLF's legal counsel. It was a simple confirmation. Subject agenda, point 4.b, all terms accepted. The transition is locked. Hallie closed the laptop. She walked to her wardrobe and looked past the beige, cream, and grey dresses Roman preferred. Far in the back, concealed in a simple black garment bag, was another dress. A custom-made Oscar de la Renta in a shade of deep, possessive emerald green. She checked her watch. 6 p.m. Time to put on the diamonds and play the part of Mrs. Foster. One last time. The Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. It wasn't just a party. It was a demonstration of hierarchy. Towering floral arrangements reached toward the vaulted ceilings. Champagne flowed from fountains carved of ice, and the air vibrated with the sound of 1,000 clipped, powerful conversations. This was the Metropolitan Legacy Fund Gala, the apex predator of New York charity events. Roman Foster moved through the crowd like a shark. Hallie was on his arm, a perfect silent accessory in a shimmering pale gold gown and the requisite Cartier diamonds. Her smile was polite, her gaze distant. Roman was in his element. "Senator," he boomed, gripping a politician's shoulder. "Good to see you. My Resurgence project will be creating 10,000 jobs in your district. 10,000. "Roman, always a pleasure," the senator replied, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. "Roman," a sharp voice cut through the murmur. Amelia Vance, the city's most feared society and finance columnist for the Times, approached them, her pen poised like a scalpel. "Big night for you. The whispers are deafening. Everyone says you're the heir apparent." Roman gave her his most charming, predatory smile. "Amelia, you know I'm just here to support the fund. We all want what's best for this city." "Of course," she said, her own smile just as sharp. "But your resurgence project is controversial. Many in the preservation community say it's a vanity project that will destroy the West Side's character." Roman's smile tightened. "That's the talk of small minds, Amelia. You can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. Progress requires bold strokes. The MLF knows that." "We'll see," she said, before her eyes landed on Hallie. "And Mrs. Foster, a pleasure as always. You're looking radiant. What's your role in this grand resurgence?" Before Hallie could open her mouth, Roman laughed a loud, dismissive sound. "Hallie keeps the home fires burning, don't you, darling? She makes sure my suits are pressed and the champagne is cold. That's a full-time job, believe me." Amelia's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. Hallie's polite smile didn't waver, though her grip on her small clutch tightened. "I mean, she has her own little projects, of course," Roman continued, gesturing vaguely. "The Beaumont Trust. Very noble. I understand the Beaumont Trust has become quite active recently." Amelia pressed, sensing a crack. "Active? Oh, I suppose," Roman said, waving a dismissive hand. "She sits on committees. They debate flower arrangements for library fundraisers. It's wonderful, keeps her busy." He was enjoying this performing for the small crowd that had gathered. He was positioning himself as the serious man of action, and his wife as the charming, frivolous socialite. This was the image. Across the room, a different kind of power entered. Julian Thorne. He was 35, a decade younger than Roman, and had made a dozen fortunes in Silicon Valley. He was now back in his native New York, pouring billions into disruptive tech, and to Roman's disgust, philanthropy. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit, but no tie. "Roman," Thorne said, his voice smooth and clear. He nodded politely. "Hallie, you look wonderful." There was an immediate subtle shift in his tone. When he spoke to Roman, it was a challenge. When he spoke to Hallie, it was with a genuine, almost curious respect. "Thorne," Roman replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "Surprised to see you here. I thought your crowd was more digital. Burning Man, isn't it? The MLF is the heart of New York, Roman. I'm a New Yorker," Thorne said simply. "I'm just hoping the fund's new leadership has a vision for the next century, not the last one." This was a direct hit at Roman's project, which was all brick-and-mortar arrogance. "Vision," Roman scoffed. "Vision isn't about apps and algorithms, son. It's about steel. It's about concrete. It's about taking a risk and building something permanent." "Permanent can be a synonym for obsolete, Roman," Thorne countered, sipping his champagne. "The future isn't about building on the city. It's about building in it, connecting communities, sustainable green digital infrastructure." "That's cute," Roman said, his face flushing. "You stick to your video games. We'll handle the real world." Julian Thorne's gaze shifted from Roman to Hallie, who had been watching the exchange with the quiet intensity of a chess master. "And you, Hallie?" Thorne asked, ignoring her husband. "What do you think the future of the city is, steel or connection?" Roman tensed, ready to cut her off. But Hallie spoke first. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the tension. "I think the future, Mr. Thorne," she said, Meeting his eyes is realizing that the strongest structures aren't made of steel or code. They're built from legacy. The question is simply what kind of legacy one chooses to build. Thorn stared at her for a long beat, his expression one of sudden, profound understanding. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well said, Mrs. Foster. Very well said." Roman, however, was furious. He hated being upstaged. He hated that Thorn had addressed her at all. And he hated the confidence in her tone. He grabbed her elbow, his fingers digging into her arm. "If you'll excuse us," Roman snarled, dragging her away. "My wife and I need to greet the guest of honor." He pulled her toward the dais, where Arthur Kensington, the elderly, snow-haired, outgoing chair, was holding court. Roman was fuming. He saw her exchange with Thorn as a betrayal and embarrassment. "What the hell was that?" he hissed into her ear, his smile still plastered on for the crowd. "I was answering a question," Hallie said, her voice perfectly level. "You don't answer questions, Ellie. You smile. You let me talk. Especially to that punk. You made me look weak, pandering to his nonsense." He asked for my opinion. "Your opinion?" He whispered, his voice vibrating with rage. "Your opinion is what I tell you it is. You're a Foster. You're my wife. Your only job tonight is to stand there, look beautiful, and not screw this up for me. Do you understand?" Hallie looked at him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were not timid. They were cold. They were the color of the ocean just before a storm. She said nothing. She simply extracted her arm from his grip, smoothed the fabric of her dress, and refastened the smile on her face. Roman took her silence as submission. He was, as usual, catastrophically wrong. The main dining room was a sea of black ties and glittering jewels. They were seated at the head table, table 1, right next to the podium. Roman was in his element, radiating confidence. He had Arthur Kensington to his right, and the mayor to his left. Hallie was seated between Roman and an elderly benefactor who was discussing her poodle. Roman was holding court. He'd had 3 glasses of champagne before dinner, and 2 glasses of a very expensive Bordeaux with his filet mignon. He was loud, charismatic, and utterly convinced of his own impending victory. The main course plates were cleared. The lights dimmed slightly. Arthur Kensington remained at the table, but the gala's host, a famous news anchor, took the stage to kill time before the main speeches. Amelia Vance, the columnist, materialized at their table, her notepad in hand. This was highly unorthodox during the main dinner, but Amelia Vance played by her own rules. "Roman, a moment," she said, her voice low but projecting. The chatter at the table quieted. "I'm running a piece on the fund's future for tomorrow's early edition. My editor is pushing me. The rumor is that your Resurgence project is the front runner for the fund's first 9-figure grant under the new chair. Any comment?" Roman beamed. This was it. The narrative was being cemented before his very eyes. "I can only say," he said loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "that Foster Holdings is deeply committed to the future of this city. We believe in building, not just talking." "But some," Amelia pressed, "say the project hinges entirely on you being named chair, that it's a conflict of interest, that the fund would be backing your own company." Roman's face darkened. "That's libel, Amelia. The project stands on its own merit. It's the only one on the table big enough to truly matter." "And what about the opposition?" she asked. "Julian Thorne's Green Connect proposal, for instance. It's smaller, more community-focused, and has a lot of grassroots support." Roman let out a short, sharp laugh. "Thorne, that's not a proposal, it's a pamphlet. It's a fantasy drawn on a napkin. You can't power a city with bike paths and free Wi-Fi, Amelia. You need grit. You need steel. Then Amelia turned her pen and her attention to Hallie. It was the move of a master journalist wrong-footing the powerful man by addressing his silent partner. "Mrs. Foster," Amelia said, her voice clear and precise. "You run the Beaumont Trust. It's one of the oldest names in this room. Your trust focuses on community, on the arts, on the very grassroots efforts Mr. Thorne seems to be championing. What is your position on the Resurgence Project? Does the Beaumont Trust support your husband's vision?" The table went utterly silent. The mayor paused his spoon halfway to his dessert. Arthur Kensington turned his head, his ancient, intelligent eyes fixed on Hallie. Roman saw it as an attack, a way to divide him. He saw Hallie in her pale gold dress as a liability. Before Hallie could form a single syllable, Roman threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, braying, ugly sound. "Hallie," he boomed, sloshing his wine, "you're asking Hallie about a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project." He turned to his wife, his eyes filled with a drunken, cruel amusement. He patted her hand as if she were a child. "Darling, I don't think Amelia understands. Your trust is... What is it you do again? You fund poetry readings, don't you? And you saved that little community garden in Brooklyn. Wonderful. Very sweet." Hallie's face was a mask of porcelain. She did not move. "Amelia," Roman said, turning back to the journalist, his voice dripping with condescension. "My wife is a woman of immense taste. She can tell you the difference between a Monet and a Manet from 20 paces. She can organize a gala for 500 people without breaking a sweat. Her committee decides on the exact shade of beige for the napkins. It's a vital skill." The insult hung in the air, naked and brutal. He wasn't just dismissing her. He was publicly castrating her, reducing her family's legacy and her life's work to floral arrangements. He was telling the entire table, the entire room, that she was nothing, a decoration. "But as for business," Roman continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl, "as for power for the real work, she leaves that to me, as she should." He grinned triumphant. "Her only job," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast to her, "is to look beautiful and hold my drink. And she does it perfectly. Don't you, sweetheart?" The silence that followed was heavy and cold. The mayor looked down at his plate. Amelia Vance's pen was frozen. She wasn't smiling. She looked horrified. Hallie Foster sat perfectly still. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her stark white against the gold of her dress. Her grey eyes fixed on Roman. There was no anger in them. There was no sadness. There was only a profound Arctic cold, a finality. She did not cry. She did not yell. She slowly, deliberately placed her napkin on the table. She pushed back her chair, the legs making a faint scraping sound on the marble floor. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice a perfectly modulated whisper that nonetheless seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. She stood up. She did not look at Amelia or the mayor or Arthur Kensington. She looked only at her husband. Then she turned and walked away from the table. She didn't flee to the powder room. She walked calmly with perfect posture straight out of the main dining hall and into the lobby, disappearing from view. Roman watched her go, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Drama," he muttered to the table, forcing a chuckle. "She's probably upset about a broken nail. She'll be back. Now, Amelia, about that conflict of interest nonsense." But no one was listening. They were all staring at the empty chair where Hallie had been. Arthur Kensington slowly turned his gaze from the doorway back to Roman, his expression unreadable. Across the room at his own table, Julian Thorne had watched the entire exchange. He wasn't smiling. He looked at the doorway Hallie had vanished through, then back at the oblivious, pontificating Roman. And then Julian Thorne did smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated anticipation. Roman's good mood had been pricked. Hallie's exit was an embarrassment. It was a public display of dissent, and he hated it. He tried to recover, to steer the conversation back to his project, but the energy at the table had shifted. The smooth-rolling confidence was gone, replaced by a strained politeness. "She's sensitive," Roman offered to the mayor, who was now meticulously studying his dessert fork. "The Beaumonts are all like that, highly strung, artistic." "Of course," the mayor murmured non-committally. Roman stewed. He mentally calculated the cost of this petulance. Another donation to her little trust. A new bracelet. It was infuriating. He was on the cusp of the greatest triumph of his life, and she had to make a scene about a harmless joke. It was, he thought, profoundly selfish. He checked his watch. 8:50 p.m. "She'll be back," he muttered to himself. "She knows she has to be here for the announcement." The lights dimmed further. The host returned to the podium. "And now," the anchor's voice filled the hall, "it is my distinct honor to introduce a man who has been the steward of our city's great legacy for 3 decades, a titan of industry, a patron of the arts, and a true New Yorker. Please welcome for his final address as chairman, the Honorable Arthur Kensington." The room erupted in a sustained, respectful standing ovation. Arthur, a man of 80 with a ramrod-straight spine and clear blue eyes, walked slowly to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. Roman straightened his Brioni suit jacket. He smoothed his tie. He glanced at the empty seat beside him. Damn her. He forced a magnanimous, confident smile onto his face. This was his moment. Arthur tapped the microphone. The room fell silent. "Thank you." Arthur's voice was frail but carried immense authority. "Thank you all. For 30 years I have had the privilege of sitting at the helm of this great institution. The Metropolitan Legacy Fund is more than a collection of assets. It is the conscience of our city." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. "When I took this position," he continued, "the city was in a different play. We needed to be bold. We needed to build. We needed to show the world that New York was strong, permanent, and unyielding. We built with steel." Roman beamed. He subtly nudged the mayor. "See, he's talking about me." "But the world changes," Arthur said, his tone shifting. "And the fund must change with it. A city's conscience cannot be static. It must evolve. The challenges of the next 50 years are not the same. Steel and glass can create a skyline, but they cannot create a community. Brute force can build a tower, but it cannot build a future." Roman's smile faltered. A cold knot began to form in his stomach. This was not the speech he had been led to expect. "The board and I," Arthur said, "have spent the last year in a quiet, exhaustive search. We were not looking for another steward. We were looking for a visionary. We were not looking for the loudest voice in the room." His eyes seemed to flick for just a microsecond toward Roman. "We were looking," Arthur said, "for the smartest. We were looking for someone who understands that true, lasting power is not in the things we build for ourselves, but in the foundations we lay for others. We were looking for someone who doesn't just understand legacy, but who is legacy." Roman was no longer smiling. He was confused. This didn't sound like him. He glanced at Julian Thorne's table. Thorne was leaning forward, his expression intense. "Is it Thorne?" The thought sent a jolt of panic through Roman. They wouldn't. They couldn't. The board's vote was unanimous, Arthur Kensington declared. "We have found a new chair, a new leader who has to us all." For the past decade been operating in plain sight, turning a near-bankrupt family trust into one of the most agile, powerful, and forward-thinking philanthropic engines in this state. Roman's blood ran cold. A family trust, this individual, Arthur said, a rare, warm smile spreading on his face, has been on a dozen unimportant committees. This individual has, without fanfare, saved libraries, funded minority-owned startups, and anonymously endowed 3 separate university chairs in sustainable urban development. This individual has been building a new kind of legacy, one based not on noise, but on results. Roman was drowning. He couldn't breathe. It wasn't possible. It was a joke, a horrible, elaborate joke. "It is my profound honor," Arthur Kensington said, his voice rising, to pass the gavel of the Metropolitan Legacy Fund to its new chairwoman. Chair. Woman. The entire room held its breath. Roman Foster's world, which had been so solid, so permanent, so made of steel, suddenly fractured. "Please join me in welcoming the new chairwoman of the Metropolitan Legacy Fund, Mrs. Halley, Beaumont, Foster." For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. 3 seconds of absolute, stunned silence. Roman Foster did not move. He simply stared, his face a mask of complete, uncomprehending shock. He looked at the empty chair beside him, as if expecting Halley to suddenly materialize, laughing at Arthur's strange joke. Then the applause began. It started at Julian Thorne's table. He was on his feet instantly, his applause loud, genuine and thunderous. Amelia Vance, her notepad forgotten, was also standing, her face a picture of stunned, ecstatic revelation. Then the mayor stood. Then the senator. Within 10 seconds, the entire room was on its feet, a deafening wave of applause directed not at the stage, but at the main entrance to the hall. Roman swiveled in his chair. A single, brilliant white spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the grand archway. And there she was. This was not the woman who had left the table. The pale, trembling, humiliated wife in the gold dress was gone. The woman in the spotlight was a queen. She was wearing a gown of deep, luminous emerald green, a custom Oscar de la Renta. It was cut with an architectural precision, severe and breathtaking. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a bodice that was as structured as armor. Her pale skin and dark hair, now upswept in a severe, elegant chignon, were a stark contrast. The Cartier diamonds were gone. In their place was a single staggering piece, the Beaumont parure, a waterfall of emeralds and diamonds that had not been seen in public for 50 years. She was not wearing a literal crown. She didn't need one. She walked into the room, not with the hesitant, sideways glance of a socialite, but with the measured, unhurried pace of a predator who owns the territory. Her face was calm, her grey eyes sweeping the room, acknowledging the applause with a slight, gracious nod. She did not look at table 1. She did not look at her husband. She walked directly to the stage, shook Arthur Kensington's hand, and accepted the light, symbolic gavel he offered her. She turned to the audience standing at the podium, where Arthur had just spoken. The applause slowly died down as people retook their seats, their necks craning, their minds reeling. Roman was still standing frozen by his table. He looked like a statue, a monument to his own obsolete power. Hallie adjusted the microphone. It made a small thump. She waited. "Thank you, Arthur," she said. Her voice was not the whisper he was used to. It was clear, crisp, and amplified, ringing with a musical authority that filled every corner of the vast hall. "Thanking you to the board, and to all of you." She looked out at the room. "For generations," she began, "the Metropolitan Legacy Fund has been the bedrock of our city. It has, as Arthur so rightly said, been our strength, our steel. But the city is changing. The world is changing. And legacy is not a monument you build and walk away from. It is a garden. It must be tended. It must be fed. And sometimes," her eyes swept the room, "it must be pruned." A nervous titter went through the crowd. "The fund's mission must evolve," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "We can no longer afford to fund monuments to the past. Or," she paused, "monuments to ego." Roman Foster physically recoiled. It was an assassination in public. "Starting tonight," Hallie declared, "the MLF is pivoting. Our primary focus will no longer be large-scale, single-developer projects. Our focus will be on sustainable community, on digital equity, and on green infrastructure. We will be funding the connective tissue of our city, the libraries, the parks, the public data networks, the education programs." She was piece by piece dismantling Roman's entire resurgence project. She was declaring it, and him obsolete in front of the very people he needed to impress. "The old way of doing things is over," she said. "The era of the vanity project is dead." Amelia Vance was writing so fast, her pen was a blur. The mayor was nodding, a sudden political smile on his face, as if this had been his idea all along. "This is not just a promise," Hallie said. "It is a strategy, and it begins tonight. The MLF is proud to announce its first new initiative, the Green Connect Charter, a $500 million grant to revitalize and digitally integrate our community spaces." Roman's hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He was shaking. 500 million? "And," Hallie said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips, "to show that we are serious about a new way of partnership, blending old legacy with new vision, the MLF will not be funding this initiative alone. We are proud to announce our new lead partner in this venture." She looked directly at Julian Thorne. "The Metropolitan Legacy Fund is officially partnering with the Thorne Foundation." The room gasped. Julian Thorne stood up, a broad, brilliant smile on his face. He bowed his head slightly toward Hallie. She nodded back. It was a coronation, a new king and queen anointed. Roman Foster finally collapsed into his chair. He wasn't just beaten. He was annihilated. He was a ghost at his own funeral. Hallie's eyes finally moved to table 1. They swept past the mayor, past the empty plates, and landed on her husband. She looked at the broken, sputtering, white-faced man who an hour ago had told her to hold his drink. "True legacy," she said, her voice dropping, but her message clear, "is not about the name you build on a tower. It's about the one you build on a foundation. The MLF is now committed to building that foundation for all of New York. Thank you." She stepped back from the podium as a new, more stunned, more frenetic round of applause engulfed her. She had not just walked in wearing the crown. She had melted his down and forged it into her own. The rest of the gala was a blur for Roman. He was a non-entity. People who had been slapping his back an hour before now gave him wide, pitying berths. He was radioactive. He watched as if from a great distance as a crowd formed around Hallie. Julian Thorne was at her side. The mayor was laughing his arm around her shoulder. Amelia Vance was trying to get a quote. Hallie was radiant. She was not the cold queen from the stage. She was now a warm, engaging, and terrifyingly competent leader. She spoke with effortless fluency about bond issues, zoning laws, and fiber-optic partnerships. She was Roman, realized with a sickening lurch, a genius. And she had hidden it. She had hidden it all behind a mask of beige compliance for 10 years. He stumbled out of the gala, not even bothering to retrieve his coat. He stood on the grand steps of the Met, the cool night air hitting his face like a slap. He had no car. The car was her car, arranged by her staff. He waited on the curb, a fallen emperor, until the Foster Holdings driver, who he'd dismissed hours ago, finally found him. The ride back to 740 Park Avenue was silent. He sat in the back of the Maybach, staring at the city lights. His city. A city that had, in the span of 30 minutes, been stolen from him by his own wife. He got to the penthouse first. He was pacing the vast marble living room, his tie ripped off his jacket, thrown on the floor, when he heard the quiet click of the private elevator. She walked in. She was still in the emerald gown, the Beaumont jewels resting on her collarbones. She looked, if possible, even more powerful in the sterile, modern environment of his home. She walked past him, heading toward the bar. "You—" He finally spat his voice, a hoarse croak. "You bitch!" Hallie paused. She turned not with fear, but with a kind of clinical curiosity. She poured herself a small glass of water. "You planned this," he accused, his voice rising to a shout. "You humiliated me. You destroyed my project. You destroyed me. Your project was a bloated, over-leveraged monument to your own ego, Roman," she said, her voice as calm as the water in her glass. "It would have bankrupted the fund and displaced 5,000 people. It was a bad deal. I killed a bad deal. You're a housewife." He roared the word, sounding ridiculous even to his own ears. You plan parties. You fat. Flowers. The napkins." Hallie took a small sip of water. "Yes, the napkins. While I was deciding on the exact shade of beige, I was also listening. I was listening to the mayor complain about his budget shortfalls. I was listening to the hedge fund managers complain about your leverage. I was listening to the community leaders in the Bronx who you never even met. You thought I was wallpaper Roman, and you were too arrogant to ever look closely at the pattern. The Beaumont Trust. It's nothing," he yelled. "It's pocket money." "It was," she corrected. "When you let me have it, it was worth about $4 million. This morning, the Beaumont Trust's liquid assets are valued at just over $1.2 billion. Roman stopped. He couldn't process the number. $1.2 billion. How? You build with steel. I build with information. While you were taking hostile takeovers, I was making quiet, strategic seed investments. You like buying companies. I like funding founders. You'd be amazed what a $100,000 investment in a biotech firm 10 years ago is worth today. Or a small data processing company. One that incidentally Julian Thorne's fund later acquired. He and I have been moving in the same circles for years, Roman. You just never thought to ask who was in the room with me." She was laying it all bare. The flower committees were board meetings. The poetry readings were investment pitches. The ladies' lunches were strategy sessions with the most powerful women in the city. "You used me," he whispered, the rage turning to a cold, sick dread. "You used me." She countered, her voice hardening for the first time. "You married me for my name. You used me as a prop. You silenced me, dismissed me, and belittled me. You thought I was an asset, and you were right. I was, just not your asset." The dread in his stomach was now pure, unadulterated terror. He was finally seeing the chessboard. The MLF chair, he stammered. Kensington. He wouldn't just... "Arthur Kensington was my father's godfather," Hallie said flatly. "He has been my mentor since I was 20. He asked me to take over the fund 3 years ago. I told him I wasn't ready. I told him I had one last piece of business to attend to." "What business?" Roman whispered. Hallie walked over to her antique desk in the corner. She unlocked a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. She slid it across the marble coffee table to him. "Foster Holdings," she said. He opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, his face growing paler with every line. It was a breakdown of his company, his debt, his leveraged assets, and at the bottom a list of his primary, secondary, and tertiary creditors. He didn't understand. "What is this? Do you remember the Phoenix Capital Group?" she asked. "The anonymous Asian fund that saved your 42nd Street deal 5 years ago. The one that bought up all your toxic debt and restructured it." He nodded, confused. "They saved me." "That was me," Hallie said. Roman's world tilted on its axis. "It was the Beaumont Trust's first major acquisition," she explained. "You were over-leveraged. You were about to lose everything. I couldn't have that. I needed you to stay on top. I needed you to keep building, to keep borrowing, to keep expanding, to keep digging your own grave. I've been your primary creditor for 5 years, Roman." He looked at her, his mouth open, no sound coming out. He was a fly in a web he had never seen. "You don't just own me," he whispered. "I own this apartment," she said. "I own the car you ride in. I own the Foster Resurgence Project, which I am officially dissolving tomorrow morning at the first MLF board meeting. I own you." She let that hang in the air, the final, brutal, undeniable truth. He had mocked her. He had called her a nobody. And for 5 years she had been his banker, his savior, and his executioner all at once. Roman Foster. The man of granite and ambition finally broke. He didn't just sit. He collapsed onto the cream-colored $1,000 sofa. His body, moments before vibrating with rage, was now utterly slack. He sank his head into his hands, his elbows on his knees. The Brioni suit. His armor felt cheap and heavy like a costume. He was ruined. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the chairmanship of the MLF. It was the sheer, suffocating totality of his defeat. It was the realization that his entire life, his entire empire, had been a stage play, directed by the one person he hadn't even considered an actor. He had been playing checkers against a grandmaster, and she had been playing for a decade. The penthouse, his penthouse, was silent. The only sound was the distant, indifferent hum of the city he had meant to conquer. "Why?" he finally asked. His voice was not a roar. It was a dry, hollow croak that was swallowed by the cavernous room. "Why? This all of it? 10 years, Hallie. Why not just leave me?" Hallie was standing by the window, her back to him, looking out over the glittering expanse of Central Park. The emerald of her dress seemed to drink in the city lights. "Leave you, Roman," she said, her voice calm and reflective. "That would have been incomplete. It would have been an emotional act. This was not about emotion. This was about restoration." She turned. Her face was not filled with hatred or even triumph. It was the dispassionate, objective face of a CEO who has just successfully completed a hostile takeover. "You were destroying my family's name," she stated simply. "You didn't just marry me, you consumed my legacy. You took the Beaumont name, a name that meant something in this city, and you turned it into a joke, a society page footnote, the silent, pretty stupid wife of Roman Foster." She began to walk slowly toward him, her heels clicking with the finality of a gavel on the marble floor. "My grandfather, Robert Beaumont, endowed the public university's engineering school. My mother, Catherine Beaumont, funded the first free women's clinic in this city. They built foundations. They built futures." She stopped, standing over him. "And you," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper of profound contempt. "You had their descendant, me, reduced to a photograph in Vogue, praised for my impeccable taste in napkins." The word hung in the air, vibrating with a decade of suppressed fury. "I didn't do this for revenge, Roman. Revenge is a messy, passionate thing. This," she said, gesturing to the room. "The city to him, this was a correction. I was restoring the Beaumont legacy. And to do that, I had to completely and surgically dismantle the Foster one." He looked up from his hands, his face ashen. The full, horrifying scope of his arrogance was finally crashing down on him. "All those years," he whispered. "All the dinners, the parties. You were listening. You weren't just smiling. You were so desperate to prove you were the smartest man in the room, you never once stopped to wonder who else was in it," she said. "Your dismissal of me was the most valuable asset I ever had. It was the perfect cover." "Tonight," he stammered, the memory of his own voice, his own public mockery hitting him like a physical blow. "At the table, when I said those things, you already knew. You let me. You sat there and you let me destroy myself. I let you be you, Roman. That was all that was required." He was breathing hard now, the last vestiges of his denial crumbling. "So what now?" he asked, his voice the plea of a broken man. "What happens? You liquidate me. You throw me out onto the street. Don't be dramatic," she said, her voice devoid of pity. "This isn't a soap opera. This is a transaction." She walked to the massive glass coffee table. From her small emerald clutch, she produced a key and unlocked a drawer in the antique Beaumont desk in the corner, her desk which he'd always considered a frivolous, sentimental piece. She pulled out 2 leather-bound portfolios. "As of 9:00 a.m. tomorrow," she said, placing the first one in front of him. "Foster Holdings and all its subsidiaries will be officially absorbed by a new urban development wing of the Beaumont Trust, a wing that I will be chairing in conjunction with my duties at the MLF." He stared at the cover, his own logo, but he didn't open it. He couldn't. "The Foster name will cease to exist in the market," she continued, as if reading a financial report. "The Resurgence project is dead, as I said. Its assets, its debts, will be reallocated. Your services will no longer be required." That phrase, the cold corporate dismissal, hit him harder than any shout. He had been fired from his own life. "But he stammered, gesturing uselessly between them. "I'm your husband." "No, Roman," she said, placing the second, thinner, blue-backed document on top of the first. "You're not. That was the last piece of business." "Divorce papers." He stared at them. Foster v. Foster. It was the final clean surgical cut. "My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, is waiting in the lobby," she said. "He will be up in 5 minutes to collect your signature. I've already signed." Roman let out a harsh, strangled laugh. "Contest," he croaked. "You expect me to contest on what grounds, with what money?" "Exactly," she said. "You are in no position to. The terms are clean. I am not a cruel woman, Roman, just a thorough one. You will be left with a small stipend-based trust. It's already been funded." She paused. "Enough to maintain your club membership and live comfortably. But you will never build or borrow or matter in this city again. You will be, in effect, a hobbyist." The callback to his own insult was so precise, so devastating it took his breath away. He looked around the vast empty penthouse, the marble, the glass, the art he'd bought. My home." "It was never your home, Roman. It was my asset," she corrected him. "The lease has been held by the Beaumont Trust for 5 years, ever since I acquired your debt. You've been my tenant." She gestured to the grand entryway. By the door, a single modest black suitcase stood alone. "Your personal effects have been packed. You'll be staying at the club. Temporarily, of course. Where you go from there is your concern." An entire life, an empire reduced to a piece of carry-on luggage. He picked up the heavy, expensive pen from the table. His hand was shaking, but he opened the file. He found the signature line. The sound of the nib scratching on the thick linen paper was deafening. The death of his world, signed in triplicate. He slid the document back across the table. "You thought of everything," he murmured. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "I did." She turned and walked toward the private elevator. She had taken off the heavy Beaumont necklace, and she was rubbing the skin on her collarbone, a small, human, tired gesture. The armor was coming off. The job was done. She pressed the call button. The quiet ding of the arriving car echoed in the hall. "Hallie," he said, his voice raw. She paused, her hand on the opening elevator door, but she did not turn around. That joke I made tonight." He stammered, the shame finally fully burning in his throat. "At the table. About you holding my drink." "I remember," she said, her voice quiet. "It was vile. He didn't know what he was trying to say. To apologize, to explain. It was all pointless. She cut him off, her voice soft but utterly final. "It was the truth, Roman." He looked up confused. "It was the only true thing you said all night. You just misidentified the roles." She stepped into the mirrored elevator and turned to face him for the last time. The woman he never saw in the emerald gown, her grey eyes as clear and cold as winter. "You see," she said, as the heavy bronze doors began to slide shut, "you were never the king. You were just the man holding my drink, while I bought the bar." The doors closed with a soft final hiss, sealing him in. He was left alone in the vast empty penthouse, with nothing but a single suitcase and the echoing silence of his own magnificent, catastrophic failure. In the end, Roman Foster signed the papers. He vanished from the world of power, a ghost haunting the clubs he used to own. Amelia Vance's story on the Gala coup became the most read article in Time's history, a modern legend of power arrogance and the quiet, unseen genius of Hallie Beaumont Foster. Hallie, of course, thrived as chairwoman of the MLF and head of the Beaumont Trust. She and Julian Thorne fundamentally remade the city, focusing on the very communities Roman had dismissed. She never remarried. She didn't need to. She was too busy building her own legacy, one of steel, yes, but of a stronger steel, the kind forged in silence, patience, and absolute, unshakable purpose. This story is a powerful reminder that the world often mistakes quietness for weakness. It shows us that true power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to mock. It just needs to wait for the perfect moment to act. The crown isn't always given. Sometimes it has to be taken. What did you think of Hallie's decade-long plan? Was it brilliant, or was it cold-blooded? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and a fall from grace, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have so many more real-life dramas and incredible stories to share with you. Don't miss a single one. What happens when the perfect life is built on a perfect lie? For 7 months, Catherine Vance Thorne believed she had it all. A loving husband, a multi-million-dollar empire at their fingertips, and their first child on the way. She pictured a future filled with laughter in their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But her husband, the charismatic Marcus Thorne, was painting a different picture, one created during clandestine business trips. When a single damning clue sends a 7 months pregnant Catherine on a desperate drive to a secluded Hamptons resort, the masterpiece of deceit Marcus has been crafting is about to be slashed to ribbons. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a saga of high-stakes betrayal, corporate espionage, and a woman who discovers that the greatest power isn't in wealth, but in ruin. Stay with us. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long, distorted shadows across the Italian marble floors. From this vantage point, 60 stories above Central Park, New York City, looked like a schematic, a perfect grid of ambition and light. Catherine Vance Thorne rested a hand on the gentle, prominent swell of her abdomen, feeling the faint, fluttering kicks of the life within her. At 7 months pregnant, she felt both profoundly powerful and exquisitely vulnerable. The nursery was complete, a serene masterpiece of cream and gentle grey, with a handcrafted mobile of celestial bodies waiting to spin above a crib that had cost more than most people's cars. Everything in her life was curated for perfection, a testament to the combined might of the Vance and Thorne dynasties. Her family, the Vances, were old money, their wealth rooted in shipping and real estate, a quiet, unshakable force in the city's financial landscape. Marcus's fortune was newer, louder, forged in the volatile crucible of hedge funds. He was the brilliant, daring wunderkind, the man who could scent a market shift like a shark smells blood. Their marriage had been the society event of the year, a merger of legacy and audacity. Catherine traced the rim of a crystal glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips. She looked at her husband, who stood with his back to her phone pressed to his ear. Marcus Thorne was a man sculpted by success. his Savile Row suit draped perfectly over his athletic frame, and his voice, even muffled, was a low, confident baritone that could soothe panicked investors and charm seasoned CEOs. He was her rock, the charismatic architect of their shared future. Or so she believed. "No, absolutely not," he said into the phone, his tone sharp. "The timeline is immutable. We move on the 25th, not a day later. Handle it." He ended the call with a decisive tap and turned a practiced smile, instantly softening the hard lines of his face. "Sorry about that, my love. Incompetence is the one market I can't seem to short." He crossed the vast living room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush Aubusson rug. He knelt before her, placing a hand over hers on her belly. "And how are my two favorite people in the world doing?" "We're good." Catherine smiled the familiar warmth of his touch, chasing away a flicker of unease. "He's been active today. I think he's going to be a soccer player. Or a CEO who kicks his competitors into submission." Marcus grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He leaned in and kissed her a deep, reassuring kiss that tasted faintly of expensive whiskey and something else she couldn't quite name. A scent. It wasn't his usual cologne Creed Aventus, nor was it her perfume. It was floral and slightly spicy, a woman's scent. She dismissed it. He'd been in meetings all day, surrounded by people. It meant nothing. "Listen." He began settling back on his heels, his expression turning serious. "Something's come up. A big something. You know the tech merger I've been working on? The one in San Francisco?" Catherine nodded. It was all he had talked about for weeks, a complex acquisition that would, in his words, reshape the digital landscape. "Well, the key players have flown in for an unscheduled summit. It's last minute, I know, and I hate it, but I have to fly out tonight. It's only for a couple of days. 3 at the most. It's the final push, Kat. This deal will secure our child's future 10 times over." A knot of disappointment tightened in her chest. "Tonight? But Marcus, my checkup is tomorrow. The big one. We were supposed to hear the heartbeat together again." His face fell with practiced, perfect sympathy. "I know, my love. I am so sorry. Believe me, I would rather be here holding your hand than in a sterile boardroom. But this is critical. The timing is everything." He stroked her cheek. "I'll be back before you know it, and I promise I will not miss another appointment. I'll make it up to you. A week in Moustique after the baby comes. Just the 3 of us." The promise of a future luxury was a common balm he applied to present disappointments. It usually worked, but this time the unease lingered. It was the suddenness of it all. Marcus was a meticulous planner. Last-minute chaos wasn't his style. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "I understand. It's for us." "Exactly," he said, relief washing over his features. He stood and kissed her forehead. "I'll go pack. My flight is in 3 hours." As he walked towards their master suite, Catherine's gaze fell on his briefcase, which he had left by the sofa. A corner of a receipt was peeking out from the side pocket. Normally, she would never have looked. It would have felt like a violation, a crack in the foundation of their trust. But the faint alien scent of perfume, the suddenness of the trip, the slickness of his explanation, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of curiosity. Her heart thumping with a strange mix of guilt and apprehension, she reached out and slowly, carefully pulled the receipt free. It wasn't from a restaurant or a client lunch. It was from La Perla, the lingerie boutique. The date was from that very afternoon. She scanned the items: a silk chemise, an eyelash lace bra, a matching thong. Size small. Catherine was a medium, and with her pregnancy she had been living in comfortable, soft cotton. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to seep into her bones. There could be an explanation. A gift for a friend's wife. A present for her, for after the baby. But why hide it? Why wouldn't he have given it to her with a flourish as he usually did? She quickly folded the receipt and slipped it back, her hands trembling. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the frantic thrumming of her pulse. She was being paranoid. The stress of the pregnancy was making her imagine things. Marcus loved her. He was building a life for them. He was a good man. He emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, pulling a sleek Rimowa carry-on. He was already in his travel attire, a comfortable but stylish cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked every bit the global executive on the move. All set, he announced, his voice breezy. "The car is waiting downstairs. Now I want you to promise me you'll rest. Don't overdo it. Beatrice is coming over tomorrow to go with you to the doctor, right?" Catherine nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her sister Beatrice had always been more cynical about Marcus, seeing his ambition as a razor's edge that could easily cut both ways. Catherine had always defended him, painting Beatrice's concerns as sisterly overprotection. Now Beatrice's skeptical words echoed in her mind. "Good," Marcus said. He pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and secure. It felt like a lie. The whole embrace felt like a hollow performance. "I'll call you the moment I land. I love you more than anything." "I love you too," she managed to whisper the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. She watched from the window as he got into the black town car, a tiny, insignificant figure 60 floors below. The car didn't turn east towards JFK or LaGuardia. It headed west towards the West Side Highway, towards the Hamptons. The cold dread solidified into a terrifying certainty. The San Francisco Tech Summit was a lie. The lingerie wasn't for her. And her husband was not on a business trip. He was on his way to a rendezvous. Alone in the cavernous silence of their penthouse, surrounded by the Hewland trapping of their perfect life, Catherine Vance Thorne finally allowed the facade to crack. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent harbinger of the storm that was about to break. She was not just a wife. She was a Vance. And the Vances did not crumble. They fought back. The question was, how? The initial shock was already hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. A plan began to form in the ruins of her trust, a plan that would take her from her gilded cage and set her on a collision course with the ugly truth. The silence in the penthouse after Marcus left was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. Every ticking clock, every hum from the climate control system seemed to mock Catherine's newfound solitude. She walked through the grand rooms, touching the cold surfaces of their shared life, the polished mahogany of the dining table where they'd hosted glittering dinner parties, the soft leather of the armchair where he read the Wall Street Journal every morning. It all felt like a movie set the backdrop for a story she had mistakenly believed was her own. She sank onto the edge of their vast bed, the La Perla receipt burning a hole in her mind. It was a single piece of evidence, perhaps circumstantial. She needed more. Doubt was a poison, but certainty was a weapon. Her mind raced, sifting through the last few weeks, searching for other inconsistencies she had glossed over. The late-night conference calls, where his voice was hushed the weekends he'd spent at the office, but came home looking relaxed, not tired. The password on his personal laptop, which had always been her birthday, was suddenly changed. At the time, she had chalked it up to his company's new cybersecurity protocols. Now it seemed like a locked door she had never thought to question. The next morning, Beatrice arrived, her sharp eyes immediately registering the tension in Catherine's posture. Beatrice Vance was the opposite of her sister in many ways. Where Catherine was diplomatic and serene, Beatrice was blunt and fiery, her loyalty fierce and her bullshit detector flawless. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Beatrice said, foregoing a hello as she dropped her purse onto a chair. Did the Prince of Wall Street forget to kiss his pregnant princess goodbye? Catherine's composure, so carefully maintained, overnight crumbled. She handed her sister the receipt. Beatrice's eyes narrowed as she read it, her lips tightening into a thin line. Size small. Beatrice said flatly, "Well, that's not for you, is it? Not unless he's planning for 2 years from now. The man is many things, but a forward planner in lingerie is not one of them." She looked up at Catherine, her expression softening from sarcasm to deep concern. "Oh, Kath." What did he say? Through tears she could no longer suppress. Catherine recounted the story, the sudden trip, the San Francisco excuse, the car heading west. The Hamptons, Beatrice breathed, her mind already working. Of course, it's off-season, quiet, exclusive, the perfect place to hide a dirty little secret in plain sight. Marcus has a corporate account at the Seagate. It's one of those ridiculously private resorts where the staff is trained to be blind, deaf, and dumb. Catherine's blood ran cold. The Seagate. Marcus had taken her there for their first anniversary. It was secluded, nestled in a private cove, a haven of understated luxury. The memory was now tainted, corrupted. "I have to know, Bea," Catherine said, her voice gaining a steely edge that surprised even herself. "I can't sit here in this museum of our marriage and wait for him to come home smelling of lies and another woman's perfume. I have to see it for myself." Beatrice studied her sister. The tear-stained face was still there, but beneath it, a new resolve was hardening. This was the Vance bloodline, kicking in the same indomitable will that had allowed their great-grandfather to build a shipping empire from nothing. "Are you sure?" Kath Beatrice asked gently. "You're 7 months pregnant. The stress, the shock." "What's more stressful?" Catherine countered, standing up, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "The agonizing uncertainty, or the cold, hard truth? This isn't just about my feelings anymore. This is about my child. I will not bring my son or daughter into a life built on a foundation of deceit. I need to know what I'm fighting." Beatrice nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. "All right, then let's go to war. But we do it smart. No dramatic phone calls, no hysterics. We gather irrefutable proof. We need more than a receipt for some slutty underwear." The first step was logistics. A trip to the doctor's office was repurposed. While Beatrice waited in the car, Catherine had her appointment. The strong, steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat was a reassurance, a tiny drumbeat of courage. She asked her obstetrician, Dr. Miller, if light travel was permissible. "Everything looks perfect," Catherine Dr. Miller said warmly. "A short car ride, say a couple of hours, is perfectly fine. Just stay hydrated and don't overexert yourself." It was the clearance she needed. The next step was intel. While Catherine was at the doctor's, Beatrice was on the phone calling in a favor from a friend who worked in high-end concierge services. It was a long shot, but the world of the ultra-wealthy was surprisingly small. When Catherine returned to the car, Beatrice was tapping furiously on her phone. "Okay. I think I have something," she said, her voice low and excited. "My friend Jessica owes me one." She pulled some strings. "She can't access the Seagate's official guest list, but she has a source in their spa. Jessica's source confirms a booking was made for this afternoon. A 90-minute couple's deep tissue massage, booked under the name Mr. Thorne. The reservation notes specify 2 therapists, male and female, for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne." The words Mrs. Thorne felt like a physical blow. He was not just with another woman. He was giving her Catherine's title, her identity, in this secret, sordid world he had created. "The appointment is at 4 p.m. Beatrice continued, her voice hardening. "That's in 3 hours. We can make it if we leave now." The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but it was the only path forward that felt real. Catherine called the family's trusted driver, a stoic man named Frank, who had been with the Vances for 30 years and knew how to be discreet. She simply told him they needed to go to the Hamptons. He asked no questions. The drive out of the city was a blur. The familiar skyline receded, replaced by the manicured suburbs, and then the long, flat stretch of the Long Island Expressway. Catherine sat in the plush leather seat of the Mercedes, a bottle of water in her hand, her mind a maelstrom of past memories and future fears. She remembered Marcus proposing to her on a wind-swept cliff in Big Sur, telling her that his life had been black and white until she brought the color. Had that been a lie, too? Was he a sociopath, a brilliant actor playing the part of a loving husband? Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, was strategizing. "Okay, when we get there, we can't just storm in. We need to be smart. You are Catherine Vance Thorne. You have every right to be there. We'll go to the front desk. You'll say you're surprising your husband. You'll be charming, poised. They know the Vance name. They won't question you. Ask for a key to his suite. The Oceanfront Villa 7. That's where he is." Beatrice had managed to get the villa number from her source. Villa 7, the most private, most expensive accommodation at the resort, with its own private plunge pool and a terrace that overlooked the desolate beauty of the winter ocean. What if he's not there? What if they're at the spa? Catherine asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Then we wait," Beatrice said firmly. "We sit in the lobby. We order tea, and we wait for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne to return from their relaxing afternoon. But my gut says they'll be back in the room. People like that, they want to enjoy every overpriced inch of the fantasy they've paid for." As they passed the iconic sign welcoming them to the Hamptons, Catherine felt a shift inside her. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was being overlaid by a chilling sense of purpose. She was no longer just the wounded pregnant wife. She was the CEO of this operation, the chief arbiter of her own fate. She smoothed down her dress, took a deep breath, and practiced the serene, confident smile she would need. She was about to step onto the stage of the biggest performance of her life, and she would not miss her cue. The unraveling thread had led her here to the edge of the Atlantic, and she was ready to pull it until the entire tapestry of lies came undone. The Seagate Resort and Spa was designed to look like it had been carved from the very dunes it occupied. Weathered grey cedar, vast expanses of glass and minimalist landscaping created an atmosphere of monastic, wildly expensive tranquility. Even in the stark light of a winter afternoon, it was beautiful. The beauty felt like an insult, Frank pulled the Mercedes S-Class smoothly under the portico. A valet, young and crisp in his uniform, rushed to open the door. Beatrice gave Catherine's hand a final firm squeeze. "Showtime. Remember who you are. You own this place and everyone in it." Catherine stepped out of the car, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders. She was the very picture of refined elegance, her pregnancy only adding to her aura of serene maternal grace. No one would guess the tempest raging within her. The lobby was a cathedral of quiet luxury. A massive stone fireplace crackled at one end, and the air smelled of sea salt and burning birchwood. A single receptionist, a woman with impossibly perfect posture, stood behind a monolithic desk of reclaimed wood. Catherine glided towards the desk, Beatrice, a half-step behind her, a silent guard. "Good afternoon," Catherine said, her voice smooth as cream. "I'm here to surprise my husband, Marcus Thorne. I believe he's in one of your oceanfront villas." The receptionist, whose name tag read Anja, offered a polite professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne. It's a pleasure to have you with us. May I see some identification?" Catherine produced her driver's license. Anja's eyes flickered from the ID to Catherine's face, then to the name Thorne. The recognition was instant. Marcus Thorne was a name that commanded respect and discretion. "Everything appears to be in order," Anya said, her smile warming slightly. "Mr. Thorne is checked into Villa 7. I must say it's a wonderful surprise. He mentioned he was here for some intense solitary work. The lie repeated by a stranger was like a fresh stab wound." Solitary work. Catherine's smile didn't waver. "He works far too hard. I decided he needed a distraction. Could I trouble you for a key to the villa? I'd like to be waiting for him when he returns." This was the critical moment. A request for a second key without the primary guest present was a breach of protocol even for a spouse. Anya hesitated, her professional training warring with the desire to please a guest of Catherine's stature. Normally we would need to call the room to get Mr. Thorne's verbal confirmation. She began, her tone apologetic. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential, charming whisper. "Anya, I've just driven 2.5 hours from the city. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm desperate to see the look on his face when he walks in and finds me there. A phone call would spoil the entire thing. Surely we can keep this our little secret?" She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both authentic and masterfully deployed. The combination of her name, her visible pregnancy, and her conspiratorial charm was too powerful to resist. Anja's professional resolve melted. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne," she said, her smile now genuine. "For you, we can make an exception. Let me program a key for you." As the receptionist worked, Beatrice let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Catherine was magnificent. She was playing the part of the adoring wife so perfectly, it was chilling. Keycard in hand, they walked away from the desk. "Villa 7 is at the far end of the property," Beatrice murmured. "It offers the most privacy." The most privacy to do what Catherine said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. The walk to the villa was the longest of Catherine's life. They followed a winding stone path that meandered through wind-swept seagrass. The air grew colder, sharper, and the sound of the crashing waves became a relentless roar. Each step was a drumbeat towards a detonation. Her earlier calm was evaporating, replaced by a raw, visceral dread. Her palms were sweating. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And then they were there. Villa 7. The name was etched on a simple, elegant plaque next to a heavy wooden door. It looked anonymous, innocuous, but behind it lay the truth. "Kath, are you ready?" Beatrice asked, her voice soft. Catherine looked at the door, then out at the grey, churning ocean. She thought of her unborn child, floating peacefully in its own silent world, oblivious to the tsunami about to hit theirs. That image gave her the final surge of strength she needed. "I am," she said. She turned to her sister. "Wait here. I have to do this alone." Beatrice hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. But she saw the look in Catherine's eyes. It was not a request, but a command. She nodded and stepped back. Catherine took a deep breath, held the keycard to the electronic lock, and waited for the small green light. It flashed. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. She pushed the door open. The villa's entryway led into a spacious living area, impeccably decorated in shades of sand and stone. A bottle of Bollinger champagne sat in a silver bucket on a low table, 2 flutes next to it. One was empty, the other half full, a faint lipstick smear on its rim. A man's jacket, Marcus's, was thrown carelessly over a chair, and from the bedroom just beyond, a partially open door, she could hear voices. A man's low laugh, Marcus's laugh, and a woman's higher, lighter laugh in response. The sound paralyzed her for a second. It was real. This was happening. Moving as if in a dream, she crept across the silent room. Her hand was steady as she pushed the bedroom door fully open. The scene before her was one of lazy post-coital intimacy. The king-sized bed was a tangle of white sheets. Marcus was propped up against the pillows, wearing nothing but a pair of boxer briefs, a tablet resting on his lap. And sitting next to him, her back to the door, was a woman. She was wearing a short, black silk robe, the one from the La Perla bag, Catherine realized with a sickening lurch. Her dark hair was tousled, and she was tracing a pattern on Marcus's chest with her finger. "You're sure no one will find out?" the woman's voice said. It was a voice Catherine vaguely recognized. "Your wife, she's not the suspicious type." Catherine Marcus scoffed, his tone dripping with a casual cruelty that shattered Catherine's heart into a million pieces. "She trusts me completely. She thinks I'm in San Francisco saving the world. She's a good woman, but a little naive. It's one of her charms." He was about to say more, but he glanced up, perhaps sensing a change in the light or a sudden chill in the air. His eyes met Catherine's. Time seemed to stop. The color drained from Marcus's face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tablet slid from his lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. He looked like a man who had just seen his own executioner walk through the door. The woman, sensing his sudden terror, turned around. Her face was a mask of confusion, which then morphed into shocked recognition. Catherine's blood turned to ice. She knew this woman. It was Sloane Davenport, a fiercely ambitious rising star at a rival investment firm, Sterling Nash. She was known for her beauty, her brilliance, and her utter ruthlessness. This wasn't some random, meaningless affair. This was a liaison with a direct professional competitor. Sloane Davenport stared at Catherine, her mouth slightly agape. For a moment, the three of them were frozen in a tableau of shock, betrayal, and discovery. It was Catherine who broke the silence. Her voice was not the shriek of a hysterical wife. It was low, calm, and utterly devastating. It was the voice of ice and steel. "Don't get up on my account," she said, her eyes locked on her husband's. "It seems you're in the middle of some very intense solitary work." She used his own lie as the first twist of the knife. Marcus flinched, as if she had physically struck him. The game was over. The perfect life was a ruin. And Catherine was standing in the rubble, the undisputed, terrifying victor of this first brutal battle. The silence that followed Catherine's words was thick and suffocating. Sloane Davenport, recovering her composure with the speed of a seasoned predator, quickly clutched the silk robe tighter around herself, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. But Marcus remained frozen, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The cocksure master of the universe was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "Catherine," he finally stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here? You should be in New York. The baby is fine." Catherine cut him off, her tone glacial. "He has a strong heart, unlike his father." She let her gaze drift disdainfully over Sloane, then back to Marcus. "I see the San Francisco Tech Summit was relocated, and that the dress code is more casual than I imagined. Is she part of the acquisition, Marcus, or just a disposable asset?" Each word was a precisely aimed dart. Sloane's face hardened. She stood up, a calculated move to assert some form of control. "I think I should go." "No," Catherine said, her voice dropping even lower, yet carrying an authority that rooted Sloane to the spot. "You stay. You were part of this business meeting. You should see it through to its conclusion." Catherine took a deliberate step into the room, her presence dominating the space. She looked around the suite at the champagne, the tangled sheets, the view of the desolate ocean. "It's a beautiful room. I remember it. We celebrated our first anniversary here. Did you tell her that, or does the personal history of the places you defile not matter?" Marcus finally found his legs, scrambling out of the bed and grabbing for his trousers. "Cat, please. Let's not do this here. Let's go somewhere and talk." "This isn't what it looks like." Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "It isn't what it looks like, Marcus. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you have any idea how insulting that sentence is? I am standing in a hotel room that you booked under your name, looking at you and your associate from a rival firm half naked in a bed that you paid for. It is exactly what it looks like. The only question is for how long." Sloane, seeing an opportunity to sow chaos, spoke up. "For about 6 months," she said coolly, looking directly at Catherine. "If you're going to have the details, you might as well have them all." It was a cruel, calculated blow, designed to shatter Catherine's composure. But Catherine didn't even flinch. She didn't grant Sloane a single glance. Her focus remained entirely on her husband, the true architect of this betrayal. 6 months, Catherine repeated softly, nodding to herself. "So this started just after we found out I was pregnant. That's a special kind of cruelty, Marcus. You deserve an award for it." She turned, her movement fluid and graceful, and walked back towards the door. She did not slam it. She did not run. She simply left, leaving a vacuum of shock and recrimination in her wake. Her retreat was more powerful than any screaming match could ever have been. Beatrice was waiting by the door, her face pale with anxiety. The moment she saw Catherine's expression, a mask of cold, terrifying calm, she knew. "Let's go," Catherine said, her voice flat. They walked back down the winding path, the roar of the ocean now sounding like a symphony of her rage. She remained silent until they were safely inside the climate-controlled silence of the Mercedes pulling away from the resort. Only then did her body begin to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. The adrenaline wore off, and the crushing weight of the betrayal slammed into her. She didn't cry out. The sob was a silent, convulsive thing that racked her entire body. Beatrice wrapped her arms around her, offering what little comfort she could. "He's dead to us," Beatrice whispered fiercely. "He's nothing. We'll call Dad. We'll get the lawyers. We will burn him to the ground." Catherine's trembling slowly subsided, replaced by an icy resolve. "Not yet," she said, her voice raspy. "First, I need to understand everything. This wasn't just a cheap affair, Bea. The woman was Sloane Davenport." Beatrice's eyes widened. "From Sterling Nash? Are you serious? Marcus is in the middle of that hostile takeover bid against them. What the hell is he thinking, sleeping with the enemy?" "I don't know," Catherine said. "But I'm going to find out." They drove back to the city in near silence. When she arrived at the empty penthouse, it felt alien, contaminated. She instructed Frank to take her to her father's residence on the Upper East Side. She couldn't bear to be in the home she had shared with Marcus. Just as she was walking into the grand old world lobby of her father's building, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. She ignored it. He called again, and again. On the 10th call, a text message appeared. "Kat, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But you have to listen. It is not what you think. Sloane is not my mistress. It's business. I am using her. Call me. It's vital." Catherine stared at the message, her heart pounding. "I am using her." It was a desperate, self-serving excuse, a classic narcissist's gambit, reframe the betrayal as a brilliant, albeit ruthless, strategic move. He was trying to appeal to her pragmatism, to the part of her that understood the cutthroat world they lived in. She almost deleted it. But the mention of Sloane's name, the sheer audacity of the claim, planted a seed of doubt. What if in some twisted way he was telling a sliver of the truth? The affair being with a direct business rival was too specific, too reckless to be random. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "She's been feeding me inside information on Sterling Nash, their defense strategy, their key shareholder weaknesses. This whole thing was a honey trap, but I was the one setting it. It was for the deal. For us. Please, Kat. I can explain." This was the twist. The sudden, nauseating turn. He was admitting to a different kind of crime. Not just adultery, but a deeply unethical, potentially illegal act of corporate espionage. He wasn't asking for forgiveness for the affair. He was trying to rebrand it as a sacrifice for their financial gain. He was trying to make her an accomplice. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless. Her husband was not just a cheat. He was a fool playing a dangerous game, or a monster trying to justify his actions with greed. The line between personal betrayal and professional conspiracy had just been irrevocably blurred. She stood in the marble foyer of her father's building, the phone heavy in her hand. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a war on two fronts. And Marcus, in his desperation, had just handed her a new and powerful weapon, the knowledge of his methods. He thought he was explaining his way out of trouble. He had no idea he was giving her the ammunition she would need to ensure his complete and utter destruction. Alistair Vance's apartment was the antithesis of the sleek, modern penthouse Catherine shared with Marcus. It was a fortress of old money, filled with dark wood, ancestral portraits, and the comforting scent of leather and aged paper. It was a space that radiated permanence and power. Alistair himself was cut from the same cloth. At 65, he was tall and silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He was a man who had weathered market crashes, hostile takeovers, and personal tragedies with the same stoic, unshakable resolve. When Catherine, flanked by a grim-faced Beatrice, told him the story, he listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't rage. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply absorbed the information, his mind processing it, like a complex balance sheet. When she finished showing him the text messages from Marcus, he was silent for a full minute, his steepled fingers resting against his lips. "The man is a fool," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "But a dangerous one. To attempt to justify infidelity as a business strategy, it's a level of moral bankruptcy that is frankly impressive." "He thinks it will work," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "He thinks I'm so invested in our wealth that I'll forgive the method. He's appealing to my avarice." "He is appealing to what he knows best," Alistair corrected gently. "He judges you by his own debased standards. He has profoundly underestimated you. That will be his undoing." He stood and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. "This is no longer a simple matter for a divorce attorney, Catherine. He has confessed in writing to corporate espionage. He has implicated himself in a plot that could not only destroy him, but also create significant blowback for our family, should it be handled incorrectly." "What do we do?" Beatrice asked, leaning forward. "We have him. Let's just release this to the board of his company." "Let's expose him." "No," Alistair said, turning from the window. "A public explosion is messy. It creates unpredictable shrapnel. We do not move until we control the entire board. We need to be surgical. First, we operate on the assumption that Marcus is lying, that this "I was using her" narrative is a fabrication to save his skin. But we also operate on the assumption that he might be telling the truth, which is in many ways worse. A man who would use an affair as a business tool is capable of any betrayal. Over the next 48 hours, the Vance residence became a war room. Alistair pulled in his top legal counsel and a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Kobe, who specialized in discreet, high-stakes corporate intelligence. Catherine was not a passive participant. The shock had transformed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. She was an active strategist, her mind honed by a lifetime of observing her father proving to be sharp and ruthless. She provided Kobe with every detail she could remember about Marcus's recent behavior, names he had mentioned, trips he had taken, the new secretive patterns of his work. She gave him the login details to their shared cloud storage family accounts, anything that might hold a clue. "Marcus believes his greatest weapon is his intelligence," Catherine told the team, her voice steady. "His real weakness is his ego. He believes he is infallible, that he is the smartest man in any room. That's the vulnerability we will exploit." While Kobe began his digital deep dive, Catherine made a call. She dialed Gregory Shaw, Marcus's partner and the COO of Thorn Capital. Gregory was the cautious, steady hand to Marcus's daring, often reckless genius. He was a numbers man, a risk analyst who had on more than one occasion privately expressed his concerns to Catherine about Marcus's aggressive strategies. "Gregory." "It's Catherine Thorn," she said, her voice calm and professional when he answered. "I need to speak with you urgently, in person and off the record. It concerns a significant undisclosed liability to the firm." The gravity in her tone was unmistakable. They agreed to meet the next morning at a quiet cafe far from the financial district. Meanwhile, Kobe hit pay dirt. Buried deep in a nested folder in a shared family cloud account, a folder labeled Vacation Plans that Catherine had forgotten existed, he found Marcus's digital treasure trove. It was a series of encrypted files. But Marcus, in his arrogance, had used a password related to a personal milestone Kobe's team easily cross-referenced the stock ticker of the first company he had bankrupted. Inside were Marcus's notes on the Sterling Nash takeover. And it confirmed his text messages. He was using Sloan. The files contained detailed summaries of their meetings, listing information she had supposedly provided about Sterling Nash's defense strategies, their board's divisions, their largest institutional shareholders' pressure points. Marcus had meticulously documented his own conspiracy. He saw it as a record of his brilliance. Catherine saw it as a signed confession. But as Kobe dug deeper, another layer emerged. He cross-referenced the intel Sloan had supposedly provided with real-time market data and Sterling Nash's public filings, and he found a discrepancy, a terrifying one. He called Alistair and Catherine into the study. "There is a problem," he said, his Israeli accent precise. "The information from the woman Sloan is not entirely accurate. Some of it is good, just enough to build trust. But the most critical data points, the ones about shareholder positions and their debt covenants, they are subtly wrong. They are not mistakes. They are traps." A hush fell over the room. "Explain," Alistair commanded. "The data Sloan has given him," Kobe continued, pointing to his screen, "is designed to encourage Thorn Capital to launch its takeover bid at a specific price point, targeting specific shareholders. But according to our real analysis, this strategy will fail. It will trigger a poison pill defense we've uncovered in Sterling Nash's corporate bylaws that is far more potent than the one she described. It wouldn't just block the takeover. The blowback would leave Thorn Capital dangerously over-leveraged and vulnerable. The stock would plummet." Catherine felt a chill crawl up her spine. The second twist. The real twist. So she wasn't the honey trap, Catherine breathed. He was. She was playing him from the very beginning. Sloan Davenport wasn't a source. She was an assassin. She was feeding Marcus carefully crafted misinformation, leading him and his company towards a cliff, all while stroking his ego and letting him believe he was the master manipulator. She wasn't just sleeping with the enemy. She was gutting him from the inside out, using his own arrogance as her weapon. Alistair Vance allowed a slow, grim smile to spread across his face. "My God," he whispered. "It's brilliant. Utterly ruthless, but brilliant." He looked at his daughter, and his eyes were filled with a new kind of respect. "He handed you the gun to shoot him, and you've just discovered it's a cannon." Catherine now held all the cards. She had proof of Marcus's infidelity. She had his written confession of unethical corporate espionage. And now she had proof that his grand strategy was a catastrophic failure in the making a trap set by the very woman he thought he was controlling. She could not only destroy her husband personally, but could also save his company from his folly, positioning herself as the key player who uncovered the entire conspiracy. The next morning, when she walked into the cafe to meet Gregory Shaw, she was no longer just Catherine Thorne, the wronged wife. She was Catherine Vance, the inheritor of her father's strategic mind and ruthless execution. She was calm, prepared, and ready to make her first move in a game Marcus didn't even know she was playing. The power play had begun. The cafe was a discreet, anonymous place in Tribeca, the kind of establishment where powerful people went to have conversations they didn't want overheard. Gregory Shaw was already there, nursing an espresso, his face etched with worry. He was a man who lived by numbers and data, and the cryptic nature of Catherine's call had clearly unsettled him. "Catherine," he said, rising as she approached. "Thank you for meeting me. Is everything all right? You mentioned a liability." "Hello, Gregory," she said, her voice even. She didn't sit down immediately. "The liability isn't a what, it's a who. It's Marcus." Gregory's expression tightened. "I don't follow. Is this about the Sterling Nash deal?" "I'll admit his strategy is more aggressive than I'd like, but his projections are solid. His projections," Catherine said, finally taking a seat, "are based on a fantasy. A fantasy fed to him by his mistress, Sloane Davenport." The name landed on the table between them with the force of a physical object. Gregory visibly paled. Sloane Davenport. From Sterling Nash. That's impossible. It's professional suicide. For Marcus, yes. Catherine agreed. For her, it's the coup of a lifetime. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine laid it all out. She didn't speak with the emotion of a betrayed wife, but with the cold precision of a CEO delivering a devastating report. She told him about the affair, showing him a single damning piece of evidence on her phone, a time-stamped photo she had instructed Kobe to retrieve from the Seagate security footage, showing Marcus and Sloane entering the elevator together. Then she moved to the business. She explained the honey trap, the manipulated data, the poison pill. She detailed how Sloane was leading Marcus, and by extension the entire firm, into a perfectly designed ambush that would cripple them. She didn't show him Marcus's confessional notes. That was her trump card to be held in reserve. She presented only the hard data. Kobe had compiled the analysis that proved Sloane's information was a lie. Gregory listened, his initial shock turning to dawning horror, and then to cold fury. He was a man who had dedicated his life to building Thorn Capital alongside Marcus, mitigating his partner's risks. To learn that Marcus had exposed them all, not just through recklessness, but through a toxic cocktail of arrogance and infidelity, was the ultimate betrayal. The man is a pyromaniac who thinks he can control fire, Gregory said, his voice shaking with rage. He's going to burn the entire firm to the ground for an ego trip. Yes, Catherine said simply. Unless we stop him. The board meeting to approve the final phase of the takeover is on Friday. We have 2 days. What do you want? Gregory asked, his eyes locking on hers. He was seeing her now not as the boss's wife, but as a player. A formidable one. I want what you want, Gregory. To protect the firm. To excise the cancer. I want you to rally the board members you trust. My father is already making calls to the institutional investors his family has relationships with. When Marcus walks into that boardroom on Friday, he will not be met with applause. He will be met with a unified front. And you? Gregory asked. What is your price? My price, Catherine said. Her voice dropping is his complete removal from the company he founded. His shares will be bought out at a valuation that reflects the damage he has caused. And my divorce will be quiet, swift, and uncontested. He will walk away with enough to live on, but he will be stripped of his power, his reputation, and his legacy. He will be a ghost on Wall Street. It was a ruthless, elegant, and total victory she was outlining. Gregory stared at her for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. Friday. We'll be ready. The next 2 days were a blur of encrypted calls, discreet meetings, and strategic maneuvers. Alistair Vance worked his magic behind the scenes. his influence turning the tide of investor sentiment. Gregory Shaw, armed with Catherine's irrefutable proof of the flawed data, secured the loyalty of the other board members. They were all sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water, Marcus's blood. On Friday morning, Marcus Thorne walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Thorne Capitol building, feeling triumphant. He believed he was on the verge of the greatest victory of his career. He had tried calling Catherine dozens of times, but she hadn't answered. He assumed she was angry, hysterical, but would eventually come around once she saw the billions his brilliant, if unorthodox, methods had secured for their family. He smiled as he took his seat at the head of the long, polished table. "Good morning, everyone. A historic day." No one smiled back. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. Gregory Shaw sat to his right, his face like stone. The other board members stared at him with cold, appraising eyes. "Before we begin," Marcus Gregory said, his voice dangerously calm, "we have another matter to discuss. An independent risk assessment of the Sterling Nash data has revealed some alarming inconsistencies." Marcus's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "My source is ironclad." "Is your source Sloane Davenport?" Gregory asked flatly. The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked around the room at the hostile faces and realized too late that this was not a meeting. It was an ambush, an execution. And then the boardroom doors opened. Catherine walked in. She was flanked by her father and two lawyers. She was composed, powerful, her pregnancy a symbol not of vulnerability, but of the future, a future that would not include him. She took a seat at the opposite end of the table, directly in his line of sight. "Catherine," he choked out. "What is this?" "This, Marcus," she said. Her voice, ringing with clarity in the silent room, is called due diligence. Something you abandoned 6 months ago. One of her lawyers slid a folder down the table to him. It contained the photo from the hotel, the analysis of Sloane's flawed data, and on top printouts of his own text messages to Catherine. His own words condemning him. "I am using her." He stared at the documents, his empire crumbling before his eyes. He had been outmaneuvered, out-thought, and utterly destroyed. "The board has held an emergency session," Gregory announced into the void. "We have voted unanimously. We are tabling the Sterling Nash bid indefinitely pending an internal investigation into your conduct, and we are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman." Marcus looked from the board members to Alistair Vance, whose expression was one of cool satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on his wife. Her face held no pity, no lingering affection. It held only the serene calm of a victor. He was finished. He knew it. Sloane Davenport's scheme had been exposed, but not by him. His affair had been uncovered. His professional judgment was shattered. He had lost everything, all because he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman who carried his child. Catherine stood up, her part in the proceedings complete. She didn't need to say another word. As she walked out of the boardroom, she didn't look back. She was walking towards her new life, one she would forge herself from the ashes of her husband's ruin. She was no longer just a Vance by name. She had become the embodiment of its power. Her child would be born into a legacy not of lies, but of strength secured by a mother who had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged the queen of the board. In the end, it wasn't the affair that brought down Marcus Thorne's empire. It was his hubris. He believed he could compartmentalize his life, keeping his betrayals neatly separated from his business. But lies are never contained. They bleed. They infect everything they touch. Catherine's journey from a trusting pregnant wife to a cold, calculating strategist shows us that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest armor. She didn't just survive. She conquered. By refusing to be a victim, she rewrote her own story and the future of everyone around her. What do you think? Was Catherine's revenge justified, or was it too ruthless? Could you have done what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of drama, betrayal, and ultimate empowerment captivated you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good tale of poetic justice, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger and more compelling than fiction. Thank you for listening.